Hello, and welcome to the Tyk Holiday APIM Extravaganza, featuring Tyk founder Martin Buhr, Twilio's Nathaniel Okenwa, and more. Now, please welcome your host, Buddha.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you so much for joining us. Excited to have all of you joining me live for this event. After weeks and months of preparation, the moment is finally here. The moment that you've been waiting for. It's one that we've definitely been waiting for as well. Welcome everyone to Tyk's Holiday APIM Extravaganza. Now, 2022 was a roller coaster of a year of uncertainty. We were coming out of a pandemic and then got plunged into a needless war. Just when the world was returning back to normal, the economy seems to be on the brink of a recession. And then there is everything around Twitter. Now, I don't want to paint a grim picture, even though I'm trying to keep a smile on. It has been a challenging year for us all. But it also gave us a chance to pause and consider the things that truly matter to us, that are important to us. With that in mind, we will be looking back at the year that was, the year 2023. We'll have some key lessons, learnings, and insights from it, and look forward to a more hopeful and exciting 2023, both from the point of view of technology and humanity. Ultimately, tech is just a tool, and it's given value by putting it in the context of the problems that it solves. I'm your host, Buddha, product evangelist at Tyk. Well, product evangelist, dev evangelist, or advocate, whichever is cooler title on the day, I'm happy to roll with it. Speaking of cool titles, though, helping me out today will be Julian, also known as the epic voice guy, the person who introduced us, the amazing introduction that we had, also known as the super cool and funky sound guy, and aka my favorite title of all, the voice of God. So please welcome Julian. Hello and welcome, Julian. It's really, really good to have you here with me.
Buddha, that's such an incredible introduction. You know, I've done my fair share of virtual broadcasts, but I've never been brought on like that. So thank you. I hope I can live up to all these titles of your, funky sound guy, music guy, whatever you need. I'm here, my man.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It is one of those events that we've been preparing for a very long time, and I'm truly excited. And the degree of excitement, of course, I think will be denoted by the number of times I say I am excited about this. So during the process, perhaps in post-production, we'll have a little ticker that says the number of times I said I am excited. But anyway, we've got a great show for you today with a star-studded cast joining us from all around the world. We'll be looking at some of the lessons and takeaways, as I said, from a year of uncertainty that was 2022, what the future holds for us in APIs and API management in 2023, innovative and impactful ways in which our customers, our users, have been using APIs. And we'll look at a really, really exciting story, an interesting story, an impactful story to come up during our conversations today. Also, we'll be having a special Hot Tykes live segment. And, things are going to get spicy for that one. So let's look at how things go. These sessions will be interspersed with the expert advice videos to crush your APIM strategy in 2023. So do keep an eye out for them. They will come at any point. So definitely watch out for them. And I am looking forward to how things turn out. There are a few other surprises that you might come across during the duration of this event. Also, don't forget, we have an ugly sweater contest going on right now. You may have heard about this. To participate, simply snap your photo and share it on social media with the hashtag APIM Extravaganza. That is hashtag APIM Extravaganza. We'll be monitoring the channel throughout the event and announce the winner at the end of it. Winners will receive an Amazon gift card worth $250 right in time for the holiday season. So what are you waiting for? Go get snapping. I hope that came out all right. All right, so to kick things off, to kick the extravaganza off for today, we have Nathaniel Okenwa, developer evangelist at Twilio, who's going to be telling us all about the new normal in APIs with a look back at things and trends that have come before and what we have to look forward to in 2023. So take it away, Nathaniel. Hello and welcome.
Take two. Obviously, I'm going to be here talking about what we've been doing in 2022 and how the trends have been changing. And look at me, I just did a 2020 trend of leaving myself muted. But, folks, hi, nice to meet you. My name is Nathaniel, and I am a developer evangelist at Twilio. And I like provocative titles. So, the provocative title for this talk today is called The New Normal for APIs. And all I'm going to be doing is looking back at some of the trends over the past year, well, really the past 2 years, and looking forward at the trends that hopefully we're going to see in 2023. So saddle up, and let me just quickly tell you a little bit about myself. I am a developer evangelist working at Twilio. For those of you who may not know, Twilio is an API platform for developers to integrate communications into their applications. So emails, text messages, video calls, voice calls, all of those things. And being someone who has to educate or talk to developers all the time about the APIs that they're using, I like to keep an eye on the industry and find out where it's going, what's coming next, what new technologies are coming. And I like to talk about it a lot and write code. So my friends call me at Chatterbox Coder. So you can find me there if you're looking. But more importantly, we are going to look back at some trends. So why don't we pause and turn back the clock? I'd like you to kind of in your mind go back. Unfortunately, I do not have a DeLorean waiting to take us back in time. But if you could just take your mind back to about the start of 2021, the buzzword that was going around was this new normal, which I honestly got tired of. It became a bit of a cliche, and it was used to refer to the kind of change in behavior that everyone was going to in business because of the pandemic. I mean, the mere fact that I'm talking to you through a video camera virtually is kind of a legacy from those days. And it has become a cliche, but I don't think it was without reason. There were some trends actually that started during 2020 and during this new normal into 2021 that have continued to come. And these trends are eerily similar, and we continue to see them in 2022. We saw that APIs continued to grow, especially in some new industries like healthcare and finance, which maybe in the past had been a bit reluctant to come and join us on this digital transformation journey. But after 2020 and into 2021 and 2022, we saw them continue to grow and continue to explode as new APIs in these fields were used. And also these industries also began to adopt APIs themselves. We also saw digital transformation was not just coming, but it was also being powered by APIs. Executives were agreeing. This is actually from a survey done by Postman, where 98% of executives agreed that APIs were an essential piece of digital transformation. So rather than building from scratch, using APIs, also building APIs internally to make sure they can grow with the digital transformation. And what we also saw, I'm a developer evangelist, and I always like looking at different technologies, is how some technologies, especially new ones, began to become more widespread. GraphQL, for instance, is one that became very, very popular over 2021 and continued to grow into 2022. But even with all of that, we got to 2022, and rather than it being like the wonderful Christmas of APIs with all of this positive growth, we came into what I think is going to be one of the buzzwords of 2022, the macroeconomic environment. I've heard it way too many times this year. I can't wait to stop hearing it. But it is a big part of our reality this year. And I think it is going to be part of what affects us going forward. I like to think that instead of Father Christmas giving us presents of APIs, we instead got Scrooge kind of like holding onto the money bag. And lots happened. We had like 145,000 tech workers were laid off. It's global inflation. There's either a recession that's either started or it's going to start. Lots has been happening. And I think there's going to be a new buzzword. It's going to be efficiency. And I would like to talk a little bit about today. What I would like to talk about today is about how APIs are going to power the efficiency in 2023. Now, I'm going to go really, really fast, blaze through this. I'm going to talk about 5 of my highlights for 2023 that I think are going to be how APIs help us move towards efficiency. So, number 1, we have API first development. So more and more companies are going to be shaping their strategy, hiring, and even their infrastructure around APIs. They're going to be modeling the technology of APIs into the very structure of their business on multiple levels. And I think this is going to be very, very exciting. We're going to see lots of companies grow, and all of these companies are going to have an advantage because they're going to be able to be productive. They're going to be able to integrate with more partners much more quickly and grow efficiently. So API first development is going to be a big word that you're going to hear a lot of over the next year, and I'm very excited to be a part of it as well. Also, developer experience is here to stay. Now, in the world of APIs, the customer is a developer, and developer experience is the customer experience. And one thing I've been thinking about recently is this holy grail of self-service, being able to empower developers and empower people to build and actually get to completion, get to production on their products. And they don't necessarily need so many resources, specifically man hours from your team. And I think developer experience is going to be a really big part of how APIs become popular and how APIs stay relevant in the future moving forward. We're also going to have one of my favorite slides. AI is nearly here. And I do say nearly because there have been so many promises over the past 5 years of how AI is going to be in APIs now, and every time we find out that it's not ready yet, it's not finished cooking. One thing I actually have been noticing a lot is there has been ChatGPT, which has been going wild on Twitter, and I've been seeing so many amazing stories. And I'm really excited to see how APIs are going to be democratizing artificial intelligence and machine learning, because companies aren't necessarily going to be able to make all of the investment to house these themselves. However, and I think a great example of this is Stack Overflow recently just banned people from posting results from GitHub Copilot or ChatGPT as answers to questions. And the reason was the AI was coming up with really plausible looking solutions that weren't exactly right. And it became a little bit confusing for a lot of users. So I think we are nearly there. And I definitely think that there will be a lot more strides happening in the next year. I'm not going to say it's going to finally be here, but I definitely think that there's going to be many, many more APIs that are springing up and many, many more opportunities for us to use AI APIs in the next year. All right, moving on, we are also going to have API skills coming into increasing demand. Now, right now, we have lots of developers who work on consuming APIs. But as APIs become more important, and when I talked about API first, as they become more important in the culture and in the fabric of businesses, more and more developers are going to need to learn how to build great APIs, how to architect great APIs. And I think there's going to be a massive influx in demand for these skills, and then you're going to see a lot of developers move there. And even developers who maybe aren't building those APIs, it's just going to be a much greater awareness of APIs and what a good API feels like across the industry. And I think this is going to be really interesting as we move forward, especially when we see education and other things begin to catch up with this demand. All right. Next, we have a new age of API management. Now, this one's really relevant to Tyk as well, but more companies are going to be using API management platforms instead of developing in-house management teams. Remember what I said about efficiency. Lots of companies are going to want to be able to quickly spin up APIs at scale, but they don't want to necessarily have to do some of the more intensive labor that would take time and money and investment over a longer period of time. And what they would love to do is be able to have the guarantees, the insurance almost of security, of updates, of keeping up with the latest technologies that a lot of these API platforms have to offer. And they'll be taking advantage of that. So be watching for the new API, not new, but the continuing growth of API management platforms as time goes on. Now, one more honorable mention that I'm going to put in here is about technologies. Because I'm a developer, people always ask my opinion, say, what technology do you think is going to take over? Now, I've used this little cartoon here. I'm going to zoom in on it. It's actually two things. You've got Santa Claus says that they'll be the victor, and the other's on saying that not while Father Christmas still stands. And we see that both actually should really coexist. And I think that's what's going to happen. Lots of people have been talking about GraphQL, about async API with event-driven frameworks and gRPC. But REST will continue to remain the default technology for APIs. But what we are going to see is the continued growth and adoption of all of these new technologies, but in specialized use cases, because there are definitely uses where some of these API technologies work really, really well. And I expect to see them continue to grow in those areas. All right. What am I keeping my eye on? I know I'm flying through these. Don't worry, we're going to have time for questions afterwards. But what am I keeping my eye on in 2023? Developer experience. The intuitive, familiar APIs, they're the ones that are going to grow the quickest. They're the ones that are going to continue to succeed. We're also going to have low-code integration. So I really think that people who are building APIs need to start thinking about how these APIs will be integrated into low-code tools and platforms, because this is going to open APIs to a whole new community of users, and frankly, a cheaper community of users, especially as we go towards efficiency. So I do expect many more integrations with low-code or no-code platforms as well. I do think that the API skills drought, which I think is coming, I think will bring with it more and more API awareness at every part of the business. So more people are going to have an understanding of API technologies and a more in-depth, not just like REST and HTTP requests, but have more specific knowledge on how they can use these APIs or how the APIs are just being used by other teams in their business. And last but not least, one of the things that I'm just going to keep on doing is playing with AI. Keep playing with and maybe create a new avatar as well. And just watching to see how I can use these to integrate into my services to pass that on to things that I built. So in the APIs I'm building, I'm already actually looking at how I can use, for example, AI to do some of the things that it does really well. For example, transcription. It does that really, really well. To do some other things as well there. All right. Thank you so much. I know that this was a lightning talk. I went through so much content really, really fast, just to talk about some of the things that I have seen coming and some of the things that I think are going to continue to happen in the future. I'm really excited by 2023, and I can't wait to see what happens with APIs in the next year.
All right. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. That was a fantastic session. A lot of these topics are actually very, very close to my heart as well. It's something that I have been playing around with and just pondering upon. Some of them obviously closer to home with the API management bits as well on a more day-to-day basis. It's really interesting that from your talk, there is this theme of democratization of technology. And you've touched upon democratization of AI, democratization of APIs and access to technology in general. I'm quite curious, how do you see organizations potentially approaching this as we move into the new year? What is, how are they likely to get affected, and how can they actually make the most out of this, the users as well as the organizations?
There's a business term that I've been hearing a lot about lately in some meetings, which is customer acquisition cost, right? And we often think about that in terms of money, in terms of marketing. But if we think of it as users as well, the acquisition cost means how quickly and how much effort does it take a new user to start using and consuming this API. And regardless of whether that is something really, really complex or something really, really simple, the amount of time it takes for someone to get that first results. Someone, I can't remember who it is, and I'm really annoyed that I can't remember their name to give the credit, but they talked about like the ladder theory and how much time it takes for the person to get the next step. You're not trying to get someone from 0 to 100. And I think what's going to happen and what is continuing to happen is people are coming with new inventive ways to make those steps much, much smaller. And this is where, for example, low code comes in or no code comes in. It's not necessarily about taking the jobs away from developers. No, it's just making the steps that they need to take much, much smaller. And I think this is where lots of API companies shouldn't just limit themselves to thinking about, okay, it's developers are our only audience, but there are so many different developers. I'm not going to say developers are the only audience, but they're different types of developers, and these developers want to work in different ways as well.
Absolutely. I'm completely with you on that. And I think that actually leads us into another point that you made, because with developers as an audience, I think a lot of times obviously we've heard about developer experience quite a bit. I think it's picked up in its in the number of mentions that it gets on a more regular basis this year as well. But at the same time, I think sometimes people do get it a little bit wrong because they try to kind of think about DX in almost a silo and almost limit what DX is to, say, tools and documentation, and then that's kind of the end of it, as opposed to thinking about it from a more holistic point of view. So just your quick thoughts on, just expanding on what you already mentioned around, DX being the new customer experience, but also thinking about the value exchange that comes with it, and really thinking about it more from a holistic perspective rather than a siloed approach.
Yeah, and when I say developer experience, it is the customer experience. I think a lot of times people think of developer experience and kind of like you said, they just think of like docs and tools. And that I completely agree is a very, very big part of developer experience. But I think all of it really, really comes in being able to surface the right information at the right time rather than just selling every single thing that your API does, being able to be intentional and be able to get feedback from them in order to improve the product and continually improve the developer experience rather than being very opinionated and telling these developers exactly how they should be using it. This is the only way you should be building with our services. So I think coming up with different ways and thinking of out of like really going universal and thinking about what is the life cycle of this developer from the day they get my site the first time and they kind of learn about it through all the interactions they have building with it. And then also, how do I let them know ahead of time that things need to change, that things need to upgrade? What are the ways I can educate them so that they can continue to grow as developers using the platform? And I think the companies that crack this, they are the ones who will have lifetime users in their audience.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Nathaniel. That is already, I've got a whole bunch of other questions. We can have an entire hour worth of session over here, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a fantastic talk and really looking back at some of the trends that have come before and what to look forward to in 2023. Thank you so much for being part of it. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, then. Thank you so much. This has been a really, really great start to our session, wouldn't you say? But we've got more. We are going to be heading on to our next segment, which is, again, very close to my heart for this, where we are talking about a little bit about the impact of APIs. We're going to be looking into the transformation or transforming access to lending in the developing nations and developing economies with Rubix. To tell us all about this, we are going to be having Setao, the CTO of Rubix, as well as Denny, who's a co-founder and CEO of Rubix. But to moderate the sessions, to tell us and help us, guide us in this journey, we've got Zoe Laycock, Head of Product Marketing at Tyk. Hello and welcome, everyone. Over to you.
So today, we're looking through the lens of APIs in order to take a look at how API technologies can meet today's pressing socio and economic challenges. As we harness technology to solve society's greatest challenges and threats affecting the global community, it's necessary for technology to be more sustainable, more accessible, and ethical than ever before. And so today we're going to take a look at how do we foster diversity, equity, and inclusion through technology. And naturally, the fintech space is a great place to start. So today we are joined by Rubix co-founders, Denis and Setao. Welcome, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Denis, tell us a little bit about Rubix and its mission.
Yeah, hello, hi Zoe, and hi everybody. Thank you for having us today. Rubix is a fintech startup working in the financial inclusion space. So we created the company a few years ago with this idea that today small enterprises and micro entrepreneurs need to be facilitated their access to financial services and financing solutions, credit in particular. There's a long history behind us of microfinance institutions who've been doing microcredit for many years, developing very interesting methodology based on the humans and creating the human relationship between these microbanks and the entrepreneurs. But what we observe today, and in particular accelerated with the COVID crisis, is that many entrepreneurs and SMEs have embraced platforms for doing their job, selling or getting paid or finding jobs, all different kind of things. So we figured out that today the future of microfinance can also be in providing them with loans directly on the platform they use for doing their business, and using their historical data on this platform as well as their links with this platform. So the fact that they are, let's say, of the platform to be able to finance them. So that's
Denise, so can you tell us a little bit about some of the unique challenges and problems facing those individuals and small to medium-sized businesses in emerging markets in terms of actually unlocking credit and the credit that they need to drive their businesses forwards?
Yeah, sure. Just maybe sizing the problem. We are talking in Africa only about a credit gap estimated at about $330 billion, right? So it means that probably around private sector gets about a fourth of the credit that it gets in places like Europe, right? So the situation is huge. And in Africa in particular, and in West Africa in particular, small enterprises struggle really to access loans from formal banks or even microfinance banks, right? So the solution very often for them is only friends and family, which is very cumbersome, which is heavy in terms of social pressure, which is not discreet. It comes with all sorts of ties. So very complicated situation. Now, in reality, why is that? It's because banks aren't, because basically the economy is informal, right? And the amounts are small. Economy informal means in order to get to understand the business and understand the creditworthiness of the business, you need a lot of work, a lot of time spent by credit officer on the field. That's what the formal microfinance industry is about, sending people on the ground and understand the business by seeing it with your own eyes or touching it with your own hands. It's small ticket lending, which then means also it's not really so profitable, because if you have €1 million to lend in Europe, you will lend it maybe to 2 companies. Here you will have to lend it to 1,000 companies, right? So the cost side and the profitability side are not so good. So this is why this credit gap is not taken. Now, when we come in, what we are talking about is being able not to send people on the ground, because we basically see the small enterprises data on the platforms they use. So we collect the data without having to support the cost of sending officers on the ground. We also much more scalable, because we can implement the platform and then go in the entire country, even in the entire continent, without having to send people over there, right? So, and then the second thing is also on the profitability, because on the small tickets, because every single loan doesn't have a huge marginal cost for us. It's just a little bit more work, a little bit more load on the server. So it's not a big deal. So automating this is very important. Also in accessing, in unlocking these markets. We do embedded lending. So we provide the loan on the platforms, right? So if you are an e-commerce merchant, your e-commerce marketplace will push you our loan offer.
And how have you worked with people to find out about these challenges that they face? You've talked about traveling around and meeting people. How has that informed how you at Rubik's have decided to go to market?
Yeah, so it's really these little interviews. So we would go in the morning with a list of people. We would know a little bit their financial habits. We would meet them at their place, and we would start talking for an hour, or 2 hours about their financial habits, about what they do to manage a difficult situation, and then they would explain that we would do small mock-ups, show them with some offers, ask them how long they would keep the money, what they would do with the money, what would be the alternatives, what they are doing now, and trying to really dig into their financial habits to understand the reality between it. Because when it's not an easy thing to talk about money with people all around the world, right? Because they will first, it's very quickly if you're not doing it well, it turns into a negotiation exercise. Like they're gonna pretend they can borrow more or less, and they are not, because they think maybe they can get something from that interview, where all you want to get is some insights. Yeah, so these type of interviews with mock-ups, and cross-checking it also with a lot of experiments and A/B testing, right? We've implemented some products just to see what happens, just to measure some intake and repayment rates, and then go back and talk again to people and say, okay, you've taken that product. What did you think about? What was easy? What did you understand from it? How did you use the money? Why did you pay so early? And that sort of thing.
And Sitao, it'd be great to bring you back in and focus on a question about really telling the story of how you came to be using the Tyk gateway, what you're using it for, and why you chose it.
I think at the beginning, our initial clients are still traditional microfinance institutions. We developed this platform with only user interface to interact with. Then later, we come across some new clients, which are digital platforms. These digital platforms, they have the technology capacity to integrate and interact with our platform through the APIs. That's why we started thinking about to provide the APIs to these kind of clients. I think for open source, it's more transparent to us, and sometimes the code is the best documentation, especially when we understand the language of the open source project. So we can also participate in the open source project of the Tyk API gateway. So this really one of the very important factors for us, and it also supports native. It has good support on Kubernetes. That means it's very easy for us to deploy and manage resources with our existing deployment pipelines.
So that sounds like, gateway deployment, you have K8s behind microservices. And so it's a classic back end for front end, simplification of the front end, so that people, businesses can embed your services. Is that correct?
Right. And also in the back end, we're orchestrator of the services from different vendors. For example, we also use the services from Google Cloud, and we also, in the back end, we also brings another open source solution to manage our loans. We will also integrate with other payment providers to provide the payment services in our platform. With all these different services and APIs, internally and externally, we want to provide our client a unique gateway to publish all these services.
Can you speak a little bit about the importance of developer experience when you're exposing your APIs? So I'm presuming that as well as actually making your APIs available, you need to make them easy to adopt. How do you achieve that at Rubix?
Currently, I think one is that because in the backend, there are lots of services from different vendors. So we first offer a uniformed gateway for them to access to. And we use open API documentation so they can consume these APIs and understand the APIs through our portal of documentation. Then I think one of the very important thing is that we also orchestrate some of the steps to call the APIs. For example, when our clients create a loan in our system, they don't need to first create the client, then check the offers or do different validations. So as a service provider, we actually did a lot of these steps in the back end. So we only provide them a simple API for them to create a loan or consume the loan.
So initially, we were really focused on the AI, right? AI was everything that mattered for us. That's where we started. We were excited about that. But very quickly, we realized for some of the business and to really go the next step and be impactful and get some actual results, it was just not enough because we were excited about it, but our partners were saying, what can we do? How do we actually issue a loan, right? We said, but go and figure out with a bank. We give you the loan decision making, all the data to manage the risk. Now you only have to go and meet the bank. But then going in, meeting a bank, referring your user to a bank partner was breaking the whole instantaneity of the value proposition, because it would take the bank even for the fastest one about a week to process the application and move forward, just inputting the loan details into their system, creating the KYC. That's where really the API became so important to create a real lending as a service experience for our platform clients, whereby they could in real time bring these offers onto their platform, but also directly act on the offer, transform it into a loan, and credit the amount directly on the customer's wallet. So that has been very transformative in our business. That's when we've been able to call ourselves lending as a service, a full provider of that experience.
And it basically brings out the complexity of who you're actually designing APIs for, and also how you how they need to interact with and understand the data in terms of developers, in terms of making the best use of your APIs.
So our conclusion, in fact, was that REST APIs were a must-have, but that it would be nice to also propose on top the ones that are handling the orchestration for you. You want to call us straight into our components, our objects, here you can do it. But if you want to just say, I have this loan and I want it to disburse and I don't want to know how you do this, I just want to know the end results, then you can also use that orchestrated API to just make it easier.
Yeah, actually, internally, we have tried to use part of the GraphQL as API, but I think most of the clients we are facing, they are still using REST APIs. Yeah. So that's why we currently, we will first just offer our APIs with REST standard, but we will think, I'm actually thinking about later to add another layer to on top of the REST APIs, so we can offer GraphQL. Because one of the great advantage of GraphQL is that the API consumer, they only get the data they need. This is sometimes very useful with low bandwidth in Africa when the internet is not good. It saves a lot of this kind of data transactions and data transferred on internet. So actually, this is something we are seriously considering. I think this is also one of the points I chose Tyk API Gateway, because right now Tyk also supports GraphQL.
That's great. I didn't know you were going to say that, but we're very pleased to hear it. Denis, if you had a chance to think.
I was listening to Sitao. What was the question? Sorry.
So I guess we were future gazing. I was asking about what's coming up for Rubix in 2023.
Yeah. Okay. So 2022 has been the year where we have really created the concept, launched the platform, started our first clients that are non-lenders, right? We have other clients on the microfinance space, but in terms of the digital platform, 2022 is the launch year. And so now that everything is becoming a reality and that the first projects are here, we want to see 2023 as the real scale year, right? So not many more clients on each of the platforms we've already partnered with. And then a lot of what's going to be very interesting for us also is to see how we are able to create growing and sane loan portfolios on these platforms, right? So it's not just about starting the project, it's also about managing that. In the lending space, in the lending business, you need to manage growth together with managing risk, and that trade-off is going to be what's going to really be our focus for 2023. Yeah.
So Denis and Sitao, that is great. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us about Rubix. It's been really good to understand exactly what your mission is and where you're trying to get to. We wish you every success, and we're really delighted to be part of that success and that you're using Tyk's Gateway. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoe.
My number one tip for API management success in 2023. Well, honestly, on any given year, I would probably say the same thing, which is make sure that your API strategy is tied to a business objective. And a business objective can be very different for different organizations. It can be, for example, about driving adoption, or it can be about increased retention of your existing partners. It can also mean about building a robust infrastructure internally so that you can deliver feature and products much quicker, more efficiently, and go to market a lot sooner. These all will still remain important for the coming years. But I think that this year we're going to see something else that comes alongside it. We will see that companies that start looking more into building ecosystems and either building their own marketplaces or being part of other companies' marketplaces. Organizations are going to look for that because they're going to be looking at how they can reach new markets and potentially with that introduce themselves into new revenue streams. So I think that marketplaces are going to become more, let's say, common in the next few years. That's it. Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Hi, I'm Dave Bisak. I'm Chief API Officer at Aperture. As a cornerstone of innovation, integration, and growth, APIs are central to enabling new channels and partnerships. Today, it's the API way or the highway. As API producers, we want all consumers to succeed with our APIs. Just as APIs contribute to your business success in today's digital world, good API management is the bedrock of API success. My API management tip for 2023 is to take a holistic approach. Smartly manage all aspects of your API program, including requirements, architecture, design, evolution, security, development, testing, deployment, discovery, availability, scalability, monitoring, rate limiting, monetization, and developer experience. All these facets of API management contribute to API success, and failure with any of them puts your business at risk. I'm excited to see API management mature in 2023 and help all of us succeed with APIs.
All right, then. Did you catch those hot tips from everyone? Like I said, we're going to be interspersing these throughout the session, so definitely keep your eye out for them as we go along through the course of the next, hour and a half remaining. So we are looking forward to some of those tips. First of all, I want to start off by thanking you, Sitao, Denny, and Zoe. Really great to understand more about some of the challenges in the space and how you're solving them in an impactful way. Happy to be playing an active role together as well on this with you here at Tyk, and really looking forward to where you take this forward in 2023. As far as the hot tips, again, in case you missed it, really at the core of things, it is about taking a holistic approach to APIs and API management going forward. There are a whole lot of different components, and you need to consider the business value, the value exchange, the customer experience, all of it put together from a business, commercial, developer, all of it comes together to build a proper successful API first business. So that takes us on to our spicy news segment. This will be powered by our opinions as well as yours. It is time for Hot Tyks Live. Let's head over to Max, our director of content at Tyk, to tell us all about it. Over to you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Hot Tyks Live, where we will be sharing and debating some of the hottest APIM opinions as we head into 2023. What are Hot Tyks, you ask? Well, it's a program we started earlier this year to give our colleagues at Tyk a platform to share their fiery and sometimes controversial takes on key topics within the APIM community. But that's not all. For 2023, we are opening up this program to the whole APIM world. And yes, I am looking at you guys. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have seen this particular opinion before, but to give you some inspiration, also a taste of what might be coming up later today in the show, and just to show you how spicy Hot Tyks can get, I'm going to show you an exclusive video from Martin Buhr, CEO here at Tyk.
So spicy.
Microservices are stupid. Okay, so hear me out. Microservices are touted as the architecture to beat when building your digital product. You can scarcely read an article or attend a conference without running into them. An application architecture where apps are developed as a collection of services. They are hailed as the best way for organizations to organize their technology stack. Let's see the benefits. 1, they are easy to scale because they scale independently. 2, they're easy to develop because they encapsulate scope. 3, they are more observable because they communicate over the network. And 4, they can be rolled back or forward easily should something go wrong. There are a host of other perceived benefits, but I'll tell you now, they are bollocks. Microservices are a pain in the arse. Let's break down those benefits one by one, shall we? 1, easy to scale because they scale independently. Bollocks! They might scale independently, but most microservice architectures eventually have system-to-system calls. This means one service scaling will cause others to scale, which ultimately means you are spending more per cycle to get the same performance as a moderately scaled monolith. 2, easy to develop because they encapsulate scope. Remember how I said there are service-to-service calls? That's called a dependency. How the does that encapsulate scope? Maybe if you embrace the actor model, you could get away with it. But you chose microservices, you absolute piece of toast. Now you have complex dependencies between services managed by different teams. What were you thinking? 3, more observable because they communicate over the network. Oh yes, let's add an observability service to the mix. Yes, the way to observe your network is to actively sniff the traffic. Why was this ever considered sane? What hallucinogens were they smoking when they thought actively hacking your network was a good idea? Oh wait, best practice dictates zero trust and encrypted service calls. Where is your God now? 4, they can be rolled back and forward easily. No, they can't. If you change the contract between any dependent services, they are ultimately coupled, and very few services exist in pure isolation. Or maybe they do, but it's unlikely you built it that way, right, Chad? Go away now.
Wow, that was quite something. I love the passion there and the spiciest of spicy opinions, I'm sure you'll agree. That gained a little bit of a heat when we published it on our blog earlier in the year, but feel free to let us know what you think in the chat. We've had some submissions already from our community that are bound to ruffle some feathers. So at this point in the show, I would like to bring a bit of an interactive element. So grab your smartphone or tablet. There should be a QR code coming up on the screen now. If you scan that or visit the website shown and stick in the code, you'll have the chance to vote on the spiciest hot tyke for 2023. And the winner will be sent a bottle of our exclusive hot tyked hot sauce. The options we have for these hot tykes are, number one, unless you are Facebook or Airbnb, you don't need GraphQL. Number two, Service Mesh is not APIM, regardless of what some people would have you believe. Number three, you don't need new features, you need better experiences. And number four, API security is more important than ease of use. Now, all of these are a bit edgy in their own way, but you can only pick one. And we can see here, or should be soon, the votes coming in. Add your vote, scan the QR code, should still work from this screen. Some will grab more attention than others. Oh, hang on a minute, what's this? Buddha, have you got some news? What's this?
All right, so we've been having some exciting conversations already, and to aid us in inspiring us a little bit more, we have a hot tyke coming our way. So, cue hot tyke.
Hi, this is Mike Schwartz, founder and CEO of Glue, reporting from snowy Austin, Texas, and my hot tyke for today is OAuth software statements. So if you're an API developer, you might need to get client credentials, like an API key and secret. And OAuth and OpenID provide an endpoint called the Dynamic Client Registration Endpoint that enables you to do this automatically. But how do we know what permissions or scopes to grant a client that's registering anonymously from the internet? And the trick that we use to do this is called software statements. It's a JWT that can be verified by the authorization server, and then the AS can automatically provision certain scopes or other claims to the client. So if you want to check it out, read the OAuth Dynamic Registration RFC and use software statements in 2023.
Alrighty then, that was great. I think that actually leads us very nicely into that last topic about API security. It's a really, really important one. It's probably one that doesn't get enough attention sometimes, but that's really great. We're off to a fantastic start. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that, Mike. Thanks for sending that so quickly. A bottle of hot sauce is on its way to you very, very soon. Should we take a look at the final results for this vote? As we can see here, the winner is option 3, which is you don't need new features, you need better experiences. That, according to you guys watching, is the hottest tyke for 2023. Whoever submitted that to us, you know who you are. And again, bottle of hot sauce is on its way to you too. Before I hand back to Buddha for the rest of the show, you can submit your own hot tykes in the comments here in the chat, or slide into our DMs on socials and share it with us at any time. Keep an eye out for more coming on our blog and on the socials in the next few months. And yeah, if you submit yours and use it on our channels, then you also will win the hot sauce. That hot sauce is unique. There's nothing else like it. Buddha, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Max. That was fantastic. And like he said, this is not just about any hot sauce. This is something that we've built from scratch. So I think this is all for you, specifically for you, something that you will enjoy. So keep those votes coming, keep those opinions coming, keep the spicy train going for all of us involved. All right, moving on to our next segment, we're going to be looking at making a case for diversity, equality, and inclusion in the tech industry. This is, once again, a really, really important topic, one that is very close to my heart. It is really close to our hearts here at Tyk as well. But to tell us all about it, once again, I welcome back Zoe, our head of product marketing, who is going to be moderating this session, together with our guest, Claire Barrett, director of APIs First, co-founder of Women in APIs. So take it away. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, thanks very much for staying with us and for being part of our API Management Extravaganza. So today we're going to learn about women in APIs and we're going to hear from Claire Barrett on that. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Zoe.
So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we want to learn a little bit more about women in APIs and making the case for diversity, equity and inclusion in the tech industry. So welcome. We're delighted to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm just going to set no problem. Sorry, we've got a slight delay there, so I will get used to it. But just to set the scene, studies show that teams that have a more equitable gender balance are generally more creative, more resilient to change, and more financially successful, and also have a higher engagement. So despite this, though, when we take a look at developer surveys like Stack Overflow 2022, the latest survey, 92 respondents are still identify as being male, 5% identify as being female, 1.7% identify as being either non-binary, genderqueer or gender non-conforming. And on the race and ethnicity side of things, 40% of respondents identify as being white and 30% identify as being European. So on the race and ethnicity side of things, you know, the numbers kind of go downhill from there. And that's kind of the state of play. But many of us in the industry are actually working hard to change that. And therefore, we'd love to talk to you about women in APIs. And perhaps you can start a little bit with, tell us a bit more about women in APIs, what it's all about, what the mission is, and what led you to get involved.
Thank you, Zoe. So the Women in APIs community, which I'm privileged to co-lead with a colleague, Uri from API Days. I run my own consulting business here in the UK, but we set up the Women in APIs community formally it was about 3 years ago, and I got involved just before the start of the pandemic, in fact. The history for the conference organizers was that 10 years ago or so, they started out as meetups on API topics. 100% of the attendees identified as male, and everybody was a developer. The makeup of attendees and the interest in APIs has changed enormously since that time. And thankfully also the percentage of speakers and now a higher increasing number of attendees has moved to be more mixed. But the gender balance is still not there. We believe that the research shows that if more women participate in conferences, that they will be able to take knowledge back to their teams, to their businesses, to help solve problems better, to be able to encourage other diversity, and they will be more likely to attend if they see more people that are like them presenting in paneling, moderating, etc. So we set up the community to help people be seen and heard in the public domain. So provide people with the skills and confidence to speak and write in public more confidently. We had about 30 names on a list and used to do a kind of a lunch at the side of conferences before the pandemic. We now have more than 380 members in more than 40 countries, and we're very proud of all the volunteer work that has gone into making that happen.
Fantastic. I mean, that sounds like a really positive way to enact change. And I love the way that you guys, women in APIs, are actually starting with empowering the individual and driving change that way. And certainly it seems very positive in terms of actually there's some individual benefit in terms of building confidence, getting people out there, interacting with the community, learning, as well as changing that balance within the industry. And I can certainly talk to that, which is, I've kind of come through the industry. I started as a developer. I am where I am now, which is product marketing, but certainly my journey journey hasn't seen very many people at any levels of organisations, as well as in terms of senior positions. And so, you know, it's always very encouraging to have people that look like you, that come from the same background, same cultures, and that really has been absent. So I'm really glad to have a group like Women in APIs that's working on changing that.
It's great, and it's you know, important to hear individual stories. But for yourself, I'm curious, how has getting into public speaking helped you? How did you get involved? How has it helped you in your career? Great to hear.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. It's not really a path that I necessarily thought I was going to choose, and I think that's the case for everybody. But basically, back in a former life, I was an e-government manager working on managing the app's integration, front end, and user experience delivery of online services for multiple local authorities in London. And I was responsible for the delivery of over 200 government services online, and the programme, in terms of its results, were nationally recognised for achieving excellence in the delivery of effective, evolving system-centric e-government services. And by extension, it was kind of held up as being a beacon of best practice. So following on from that, I was actually asked to share the achievements of the programme and the best practices with other web managers, other application architects, and just share how we put that programme together, and the wins, the losses, and everything. That's how I got into public speaking. And, you know, to actually knowledge share is what actually got me moving in that direction. But in terms of the impact of public speaking on myself, it's really helped build my confidence, but it also gave me an opportunity to engage with, you know, the developer community, the web manager community at the time. And as I've gone through my career, it's a key part of actually feeling part of something. Being part of a community gives me the opportunity to network and meet others in my space. Sometimes it's a bit of a support group as well, but primarily it's given me a platform to share my knowledge, experience, and passion, and also to learn from others.
It's great, and I love your story, which is actually something that we find a lot of our members need help and encouragement with. Many of them start out saying, well, who would be interested in what I might have to say? And you know, they don't necessarily even want to put themselves forward to speak. There are many opportunities there. The conference organisers, for example, are really keen to be able to you know, involve more people. So there's many opportunities to speak. They just don't think they have something to say. But your example in that e-government piece was talking about a team, it sounded like, very much. And we find that a lot of women are more comfortable talking about the team, showcasing, if you like, the talents of the people around them. They find that a much easier place to start from. And when we actually talk about, well, that, you know, as a team participant or as a team leader, one of your responsibilities is to make sure that the team's success is understood, and people know what a great job they're doing. And that can often be a great way of getting people started. And we find we do a lot of that. It's about just sometimes giving people the nudge. They've got it all there, and so we create environments in which they can get access to mentors, that they can, in a small, safe format of you know, half a dozen people, they can talk about what holds them back, what they would, you know, how to find something that somebody would be interested to speak in, taking the courage, putting in the time, because it does involve time, carving that time out of their day and seeing it as an investment in their professional development, as opposed to perhaps something that they're kind of obligated to do and they're naturally very uncomfortable with. And we've found the virtual cheer squad, the community side of it, has been fantastic, particularly through a period where initially everybody was remote, and now still so much of work is remote. People need to feel that connection, like we're doing here today, in this remote world that we all live in now.
And I'm interested in what, can you identify some of the benefits of people getting involved with programs like Women in APIs? There's also countless other ones there crossing gender and ethnic groups and groups where, LGBT groups, but all the common element is people in tech, but that are underrepresented. But what are the benefits of joining in with groups like Women in APIs, Women Who Code, Black Girls Code, and lots of others in terms of what they can take back to their own roles within their jobs, their networks, and their communities?
I mean, it's a really important point. And as you say, Zoe, there are fantastic numbers of organizations of people putting in time or investment or resources to actually make these types of change happening. And I think there's, of course, different ways that you can be involved. You can sign up as a member and join events and get to connect. If you like, be a sort of a consumer of one of these community services or these organizations, or you can get involved and volunteer yourself. And many people find that actually finding a place in their, within their organization or as a representative on these communities, it's a great way for them to be able to talk about something that they might feel strongly about, to share their lived experiences in a way that their colleagues can understand. I would, however, say that there's always a little bit of word of caution on this piece. I mean, fortunately, the research, I think, is becoming more visible to the fact that a lot of people are putting this time in to do this work, and it's not necessarily acknowledged by their peers in their organization or their managers as actually really important work. It's sometimes referred to as non-promotable tasks. Unfortunately, often some of these non-promotable tasks about promoting diversity, equity, inclusion types of activities and agendas is not seen as real work. But for businesses, it's really important to have a diverse workforce. They'll make better decisions. It's a better place for people to come to work. It will attract and retain more talent when people understand the commercial, the economic, the social responsibility. They can then see that anybody in their team who is putting time into work and support these communities gets more than just being a member. They actually can, help encourage the environment of work. So it's really good stuff. Allies are really important. Get involved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. And it's actually one of the key drivers at Tyk. And recently I had an opportunity to actually get together in a remote retreat with most of my fellow Tyklings. And it was absolutely amazing, but also inspiring that one of the key reasons that people are attracted to Tyk, and one of the considerations, because let's face it, when you're going for a job, it's a two-way fit, right? And one of the considerations from many candidates at Tyk is actually looking at the existing workforce and the diversity, but not just the diversity as it is today, but also what the company values are and philosophies are, to make sure that, right from the inception of what kind of culture the company is trying to build is actually quite inclusive. And what was really moving recently was hearing from, we had Tyklings flying into one location from 33 different countries. And it was a real joy to be part of that and to see how the company's doing in terms of that journey towards diversity inclusion. And also that people felt that the company was generally a safe space and a positive place that was really made more positive by its cultural, ethnic, and also sexuality diversity, so identification diversity. So that was really good to see. And I think it's important to make that point that people do look for that when they are looking at companies. They are looking to see people like themselves, and they're looking to see not just tick box diversity, but actually really what the company is about and what it aspires to be. And then obviously once you get on the inside, it's about making sure that it lives up to that aspiration.
And I think,
Sorry, go
just
ahead.
going to say it's great to hear that whole culture in the organisation of getting behind this this important change issue, if you like. And we find we've got increasing number of male allies who are members of our community. We think it's an everybody conversation. People who are actually joining in to find out what more they can do to help their colleagues who identify as female, to help their organisations understand how to make a difference. So great to hear that you're doing that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the other point is that from an engineering and a development point of view, again, it's very important to have diverse teams that are engineering both technically, but also the user experience of and how the diversity of how people interact with technology, on what platforms, and accessibility also is part of this picture, so that we are developing technologies for people that may well interact with them in ways that are different from the way you and I would. So I think having a diverse engineering and product team really helps with that, as it does in marketing as well. It's about trying to drive usage of products in a way that actually really appeals to that person and appeals to their personal situation and their jobs to be done, so that I've certainly seen advertising that looks very off-putting and non-inclusive in its essence, and that really puts me off really using products and services that actually take that kind of approach, because I'm assuming it comes from the inside out and is then projecting. So that I think companies that actually work to not do that, and to actually really, there are business benefits of actually being a lot more inclusive and diverse in the way that you go to market with your products and services as well. So I think all of that is driven from the inside out, and is another reason why it's important to really land on building diverse teams.
Yeah, and I think if you look at APIs as I think what now used by something like 97% of the developers around the world or something like that, we see more and more that organizations that are really getting behind APIs as products, for example, recognize that the sorts of opportunities that those APIs are presenting actually calls for very device thinking, because they're using them to collaborate beyond the boundaries of traditional enterprises. They're using them to embed or be embedded. And all of this requires teams around that API product thinking that have a very different outlook. And the best way you can get different ways of solving problems is by having as diverse a group as possible thinking and collaborating and creating differently. So
100%.
It's one of the reasons I think there's a really nice synergy in what we do.
Absolutely. And let's finish off with, we actually have API Days in Paris next week as a conference. I know that Women in APIs will be present. Would you like to just give a quick overview of what there is for people to join in with at Women in APIs at API Days Paris?
Yes, so the information's all on the website, apidays.global. So the conference organisers there put up the agenda. It's some of Wednesday, Thursday and Friday next week. And on the Friday, we are doing a Women in APIs panel around attracting API talent, what the next 10 years could look like. And we've also got a networking and roundtable lunch on the Friday. You can sign up for the lunch on a separate Eventbrite, but register for API Days Global to join the conference. We'd love to see you there. You can also see on the API Days Global website initiatives. You can join our community. If you're not going to be able to join us in Paris next week, please join someone in one of our other 40 countries where there will no doubt be some other members of the community that you can make friends with. We look forward to having you there.
Fantastic. Well, I really look forward to joining you all there. And I'd really like to say thank you so much for being with us on the API Management Extravaganza. We really appreciate hearing from you, learning from you, and actually learning a lot more about women in APIs. So thank you so much, Claire. And with that, I'd just like to kick it back to Buddha. Buddha, if you're out there in the ether, time to kick it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey everyone, my name is Shane Kasai, and I'm the founder of Sparrow. Sparrow is a decision-making tool to help teams make better decisions. When I became VP of engineering in my day job, I noticed that group decision making is actually really flawed. When it comes to group decisions, we're influenced by bias and constraint all the time. Maybe the loudest person in the room is making the decisions, or maybe we're used to using the same solutions for different problems because we're comfortable with it, or maybe our financial constraint is pushing us towards a temporary solution. I really wanted to make decision making better. So in 2021, I built a prototype, but by then I had to tap into my own finances to pay for simple things like hosting while supporting hundreds of users that had already signed up. At the same time, users told me that one of the biggest problems that they face is actually not knowing how to approach a problem. Through Tyk's side project fund, I was able to explore something that was a little out there, something that was basically a paper napkin sketch. What if I could use OpenAI to augment group decision making? Later that year, I had built out a prototype using OpenAI that has the capability of answering questions. Questions like, what is the best way to improve team communication? To things like, how do we upskill our engineers? Today, Sparrow is able to look at your decisions in real time and offer suggestions on what to do. I'm really grateful for the Tyke Side Project Fund because it gave me a runway to look at things that I would have hesitated on because of a financial constraint. It also gave me an icebreaker to speak with people and bring curiosity to the platform. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Tyke, for giving me this opportunity. I will never forget it.
RestPoint was built for a simple reason, and that is you really don't get the real feedback on software, APIs, until users get to use it. And that's where you see the problems, that's where you see what you did right, what you did wrong, and what you could have did better. So the whole idea as RestPoint is allows you to build high fidelity API prototypes that really look and feel exactly like the end API will, but you get to see it during the requirements phase. And if you design your API right the first time, it certainly saves a heck of a lot of problems and all the process to now address a bad API. Just came across the Tyke competition and put RestPoint into that just really to see what an API company would think of the tool. It was nice to hear from them that qualified for the award, which came with a little bit of a budget that helped with the website and get some help. And overall, it was a great experience getting involved with Tyke on this competition. Number one tip for developers, I'd have to say is really just to stay focused on the real problem you're trying to solve. It's tempting to dip into lots of other areas, but staying focused really on the business problem you're trying to solve is the main tip I would have.
Well, thank you so much, Shane and Brian, with that. But of course, going back a little bit, thank you, Zoe and Claire, as well. It was a fantastic session, of course, and diversity, equality, and inclusion, all really, really important topics that we all have a part to play in. Something that we take very seriously at Tyke, and you should too. So with that leads us also to another thing that's very, very close to our heart. And we just had the hot tips from there, which is Tyke Side Project Fund. It was an initiative that we wanted to use and help developers who are working on something that they were really passionate about and to really just help them along and help them along that journey. And of course, we can see how that has fared over the years and heard the stories from, once again, Shane and Brian about RestPoint and Sparrow. So if you are keen to pursue the Tyke Side Project Fund and want to pursue something that you are really passionate about, do feel free to reach out to us and we'll help you out with your journey as well and kick the start that. Okay, that brings us on to our main event for today. This is a fireside chat about finding success in 2023 with two of my favorite people in the APIs world, people I look up to in this space. I've had the pleasure of working with them closely, one within Tyke and one in collaboration with Tyke over podcasts, blogs, and white papers. So it's a journey that goes back nearly 3 years now, which has been phenomenal and really, really exciting and eye-opening for me as well. Please welcome Executive API Consultant and author, James Higginbotham. Hi, James.
Hi, Buddha.
All right, we've got both of us, of course. Hi, James.
Hi, Buddha. Thanks for having me.
And of course, together with us is our very own founder and CEO of Tyk, Martin Buhr. Hi, Martin. Good to have you here.
Hello, hello. How's it going?
All good, man. We are about into the second half of this show, and hopefully people are enjoying this. Hopefully people do still remember that we have an ugly sweater contest that's going on as well. So definitely keep those pictures coming in. So for this segment, I'm, of course, really, really excited about this because we've got a full, 40 minutes to talk about what has come before and what we have to look forward to in 2023. But before we get started, perhaps a round of introductions. Obviously, I've given just the role title and name. That's probably not enough. But let's kick off with a round of introductions. Perhaps, James, if you could kick things off over there.
Sure. So, James Higginbotham, I'm the founder of LaunchAny. We are a consulting practice that focuses on helping organizations establish, grow, and mature their API programs. So we do training, consulting, work with organizations of all sizes.
Thank you so much, James. Over to you, Martin.
Hi, Martin Buhr, CEO and co-founder of Tyk Technologies. I co-found and run Tyk.
Well, as an icebreaker, perhaps let's look at 2022. There were a lot of moments, some of which actually Nathaniel touched upon as well, some of the trends that we saw in the early part of the session. But I'm really curious from you gentlemen here, was there a moment, an event that really stood out to you? Think about perhaps a human moment, maybe a tech moment, maybe a combination of those moments. What do you have in mind? I'm going to go over to you, Martin, perhaps to kick this off.
Hi, yeah. So I think I was gonna go with some of the geopolitical crap that's going on these days, but then I couldn't quite decide on which one to focus on because there's some pretty horrible stuff going on. So instead, I'm going to go with something that sort of happened recently. Actually, just it sort of seemed to have happened in the last couple of weeks, which is this sort of new generalized hype train with how fast AI is progressing. I don't know about other folks watching on the call, but our internal Slack has been all agog with what's been going on with ChatGPT and OpenAI. And it's been going on for a while. I think I wrote a blog post about it a couple of weeks ago, something similar. But it's just become, I think we've entered a sort of new phase of accessibility for this type of technology for the average consumer instead of the more techie developer type. And these synthesized models, these things that can literally create things out of the corpus of human knowledge and corpus of human language are fascinating, for one, because they're so bizarre. But at the same time, I feel like we're sort of on the cusp of something where once tooling is built around these events, I mean, we just had somebody talk about using OpenAI to build a tool for team collaboration. That's going to accelerate. There's already a tool now to comment your GitHub commits with ChatGPT. Things like that, just immediately appearing because this capability has suddenly become available. And while a lot of people don't really know what to do with AI, I think at the moment, all the sort of obvious stuff is being done. So, direct content generation, direct image generation, video generation, things like that. But I think it's going to go further than that as those tools slowly but surely creep down the value chain. And I don't know if folks know this, but it's already happened in gaming. These AI upscaling processes have been built into our graphics cards. So instead of having to render a 4K image, they render a 1080p image and they upscale it to 4K. But instead of doing it through an algorithm, they do it via this encoded AI model. And it's incredibly successful because it means that you don't even see the difference. I think the biggest sea change this year's brought in terms of tech is this normalization, or not normalization, but this sort of magic black box that is AI, And we're going to see, going into 2023, 2024, some really interesting tooling built on the top of it that is going to be very cool, but also exceptionally creepy.
Well, that is very, very true. I think there was a trend around deep fakes that came up quite recent. I mean, a couple of years ago as well, which again was kind of, you could make out the difference, but there was a definite creep factor that was there. I mean, there was after you went past the, oh wow, that looks cool, but then the creep factor really set in really quickly. So absolutely agree with you. And AI is obviously not something that is new. It's been around for a long time now. It's again coming down to how accessible that it has become, or it is becoming over the last few months in the past, and now over on to 2023, and how that's going to change things as we go along. The way we think about work, the way we think about coding as developers, and how that's all going to come to a head perhaps, and the way we think might need a bit of a change. So with that, over to you, James. Any thoughts about, looking back at 2022, a event that stood out for you, human or tech?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm going to point to Twitter, but I'm going to take it from a different angle than I think most people probably are thinking I'm going to take it from. I'm not talking about the sensationalism, the headlines, the controversies. For me, it was watching Twitter. People tweet that they're leaving Twitter, or tweeting that they're going to expand their social network. And I think for me, the lesson was, or a reminder was, that a lot of us are looking for the lowest friction way of getting things done. And so a lot of people were leaving Twitter for Mastodon. Mastodon's been around for a while. It's been accessible for quite a while, but it just didn't quite have the push for people to try it out. But when they did, it's a very decentralized way of building a social network, but everybody went centralized. Even though maybe not everybody could stand up their own servers, they still ended up gravitating to the single service that was the primary service. And it was fairly rare to see a tweet where somebody created an account that existed on a server that people didn't know about. It was kind of, so people still gravitated towards centralization. And I'm sure there's a lesson learned there that could apply to us in kind of the API space, and the API program management space, in the organizations and startup space, whether it's enterprise or startups or whatever else. That we have this tendency to find kind of where everybody's at, or where everybody's going, or want to go to kind of a central authority to try to find something. So to me, that was kind of the observation more than any of the other sensationalized headlines that were out there, and everything else was just the human nature of wanting to do that. And what does that mean for us going into 2023 when we think about our API programs? It kind of stood out to me.
Agreed. Thank you so much, James. That's a very interesting take on it. And I think that centralization versus decentralized conversation, that's actually come up quite recently when I was doing a bit of research as well. And I think obviously there is another big area around Web 3.0 that we've been talking about for a little while, and where it stands today, the practicality around it, the promise of it all. And I think there is still that element of obviously having that mind shift around decentralization, and how do you merge with what people's psychology would enable or allow them to do at this point of time. And I think that's a very interesting take, and maybe a problem for Web 3.0 to solve as well. But we can probably talk about that a little bit more in detail in our next segment, perhaps. And in this segment, of course, thank you so much for that introductory salvo. Thank you, Martin and James. On to our next segment, we're going to be taking our Hot Tyk segment a little bit further. This is an opinions segment, and just to get your thoughts about some of these areas, that obviously one of which Martin definitely feels very strongly about, that he's already let the whole world know. So let's kick it off with that very topic. So this is your stage once again, Martin. Microservices. What do you think? Force for good, force for evil, Jedi, Sith? Where do you stand with it? And is there an alternative to it?
Right. So microservices. Okay. So first of all, thank you for exposing me so blatantly to the world with that video. I regret making it now. Just for those watching, I was in the background when that came up, and just sort of screaming no into our chat room, going, "How dare you!" So there will be consequences. So what do I actually think of microservices? Well, I do think that they're overblown. I do really worry that we see a lot of customers come our way saying, "Oh, we're adopting microservice," and I'm like, "Well, you guys are a team of 10. But what are you doing with microservice? Who's going to support all this stuff?" There is basically, it's a force for good when used in the right context. Some companies really need them. Netflix probably needs them. Amazon probably needs them. Facebook probably needs them. Does your small startup need them? Probably not. Does your medium scale startup need them? Probably not. Do you need to adopt them because Facebook adopt them? Probably not. It all comes down to using the right tool for the right problem. And in this particular case, I worry that groupthink and trends have dictated what the market decides is good. And then at the same time, we've got companies like Amazon and Google pushing the idea of microservices with Kubernetes and things like that, and sort of saying this is the right way to do it. And the next step for microservices is functions as a service, and just trying to get to this position where you're utilizing more and more and more compute power with the assumption that it is cheaper and almost free, when that's not necessarily the case, because at certain scales, those economies break down, and you end up actually in a position where things are more expensive, things are more costly, not just in terms of hardware, but in terms of people to maintain this scale. And you got to really ask yourself, do we need to maintain this scale? And are there better ways to do it? A lot of scale problems got solved in like the 70s. And one of my favorite examples is Erlang. So Erlang is a programming language that lots of people will know, probably better nowadays as Elixir. It's a framework built on top of Erlang, which is very, very cool and hip if you adopt it. Erlang is based on the actor model, and it's designed around essentially building microservices. But the entire language is built around building these microservices that are idempotent. And Erlang was designed by Ericsson for the GSM network to control huge, massive, distributed call provisioning for mobile phones. So huge traffic, massive data volumes that were just suddenly that were architected for. And I feel like we are reinventing the wheel in some cases with microservices, saying, "Oh, let's go do this again. Just let's do it with Kubernetes and the cloud." And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just trying to draw a parallel between the problems seem to be cyclical, and microservices are the right thing to do when you have large scale. But do you need to do it the way we do now? I don't necessarily know. I'm obviously not an enterprise system architect. I'm not designing the next Twitter, but I do feel like microservices in the using microservices when you don't need them is a problem, and technologists do tend to fall into the trap of following a trend for the sake of it because it makes them sound good, or it's a good thing to put on their CV and it gets them their next job. And all of those kind of factors need to come out when you're making infrastructure decisions. And I do feel like at the moment it's overblown.
Yep. Well, absolutely. I think this is one of those interesting things where I think for a long time when people were thinking about digital transformation in our space, they were always thinking, how do we get from monolith to microservices? And it was very much that conversation that was driving a lot of these API programs, was driving a lot of these digital transformation, consultants to begin with, but really the entire business is built around just getting people from monolith to microservices. And like you said, in some cases that probably is warranted depending on what scale and what problem you're really trying to solve. But just being a me too simply because somebody else at a greater scale is doing it is probably going to be a very, very costly proposition. So to get your thoughts in on this, James, opinions on microservices. I think there was a time where monoliths were just seen as pure evil. Like, oh, if you're doing monoliths, you do not belong in the digital space anymore. If you're not on microservices, you just, you should abandon ship. So your thoughts on how we have come in the journey so far?
Yeah, I agree with Martin on a lot of the points that he raised. Kelsey Hightower from Google had sent out a tweet years ago that I feature a lot of times in my slide decks, and paraphrasing it, I think he roughly said the biggest mistake about monoliths is that people think there can only be one. So they assume that there can only be one monolith inside an entire organization and that everybody has to contribute to that one monolith, when in reality, we can have multiple monoliths and we can have small or mid-sized monoliths. And that unit can be managed appropriately and modularly designed. And I think what we've lost in the software engineering world with the advent of all these frameworks and kind of nice little CV builders and everything else is that we lost the ability to design software and to be thoughtful about it. And so we lost the ability to remember what loose coupling and high cohesion are and some of the core foundational principles of software design. And then we go off and we do microservices, which is that in a distributed world. And we go in doing that without understanding the fallacies of distributed computing and the impact of it and how putting something on the network is going to slow things down. How our tooling today that exists is still not there and sufficient enough. If I want to refactor something, I can refactor a code base, but tell me how I refactor across multiple microservices that are in different repos and different code bases. The tooling's just not there. So the reasoning behind choosing microservices needs to be sound. There are time and a place for it, but like everything, we have to understand the pros and the cons. We have to understand the architectural principles behind it and what trade-offs we're making. And I think a lot of organizations are just adopting it because they think it is the end-all be-all solution. And they're not really understanding that the tooling, the infrastructure costs, the training, the difficulties, the coordination can increase. A lot of those things can increase. And I think Uber and others have written about the fact that they've gone down those paths before, and then they think that they're going to have owners of a particular service, and that owning team will be able to make changes to that service. And then all of a sudden we start implementing a feature, and if we got the boundaries wrong and the service isn't the right level of granularity or have the right boundaries around it, all of a sudden we have to spend a lot of time trying to understand and coordinate deployments of multiple services all at once, because we've got to go in and we have to, manipulate a number of services at once. So there's good reasons for it. It enables us to solve some good problems, but I think a lot of the software we build isn't complex enough to need to distribute that code across multiple code bases and start involving networks and observable infrastructure and all kinds of additional solutions and operational costs needed to see that benefit. I think that in the end, there might be a really good opportunity for businesses that do software recovery projects to come in and kind of undo some of the things people have done, or it's going to take somebody coming in and trying to figure out how to back off a little bit from the aggressiveness of it and try to look for some of those more medium-sized coarse-grained services to be able to break things down while keeping the code bases manageable, so that, as Martin said, a startup isn't going off and with 10 people trying to build 1,000 microservices, and a big organization isn't doing things so fine-grained that they're having to manipulate lots of network calls and then do effectively two-phase commit using sagas and other kinds of techniques to try to overcome things that they introduced to begin with by maybe going down the wrong path if it wasn't the right fit.
Yep. Thank you so much, James. And of course, any person who's watching us live, everyone who's watching us live at this point of time, you do feel free to ask your questions. We are going to be taking on these questions beyond what we are talking about right now. So keep them coming, whether you're on YouTube, LinkedIn, or any other platform that you are watching this from. Keep them coming, and we'll be taking them and fielding them and getting the insights from both Martin and James. I think moving on to the next one, which is actually an extension of this particular segment of microservices, which is service mesh and API gateways. It seems like right now we are in slightly muddy waters with what these things actually mean. Are they different things? Are they the same? Is service mesh API management? Is it not? So there's a lot of confusion. Some players have different opinions on this, and of course we've got our own. So I'm quite curious, perhaps, again, to take your stance on the muddy waters of service mesh and how do we address that? Are they different? Are they the same? What's your take on it? Martin, over to you.
Right. Depends who you're talking to, really. I feel like if you're a microservice aficionado and you think, okay, we're going to do everything with microservices, and you enter those scaling issues where you do have to start worrying about, a whole application that's distributed across thousands of microservices. You need a way to observe that. You need a way to deploy those. You need a way to secure them. And service mesh was designed to help deal with the microservice pattern, because the microservice pattern on its own is really hard to manage. So it's kind of like, we built a technology to manage your VMs. We built a technology to manage your smaller VMs. We built a technology to manage your microservices. And it's just one stack on top of the other in order to make this work. And sort of increasing abstraction of complexity. At some point, you go into a microservice, into a service mesh, and you go like, well, what's it actually talking to? Because it's a meta network, right? It sits on top of the actual network. From an engineering standpoint, from a developer standpoint, I really don't like complexity. I mean, the engineers that have seen my code probably disagree because they'll go, Martin, you love complexity, your code is unreadable. But from an architect's point of view, I really do want to avoid complexity as much as possible. And when you look at service mesh, you go, hang on, I've got to learn Kubernetes. I've got to understand the microservice pattern. Then I've got to deploy that. And then once I've understood that, I have to implement a service mesh. And I have to understand that. So your roadmap for onboarding is really steep. So overall, I think it's not a bad thing. It's a technology designed to solve a problem for a very, very popular software architecture. Fair enough. And depending on who you're talking to, there's a vested interest on whether or not you should adopt it. If I sold you a gateway or a product that was heavily invested in service mesh, then I would tell you that is the best thing to do in service mesh. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if you're talking from an API gateway perspective, it's biased again because we are, well, an API gateway comes from a sort of slightly older way of thinking where you are trying to protect sort of north-south traffic instead of east-west. And in fact, when service mesh first came out, there were two deployment models. There was the highly distributed one where you had lots and lots of tiny proxies, and then there was the other version where you had an enterprise, where you had a bus, which was basically an API gateway where you would route all the services through, and then you would just manage the bus. That's fallen by the wayside now for the more distributed approach, but that's where it started. And I do think it is slightly muddy, as you say, between what an API gateway does and what a service mesh does. API gateway, but then if you look at it from this perspective, API gateways are specialized proxies. They are proxies that are laser focused on doing API work and solving problems in that space. And service mesh is an extension of API gateways. It is a proxy that is laser focused on connecting multiple systems and making system calls possible and creating observability layers and security layers across thousands and thousands of microservices. So at their core, they do very similar things. They move traffic from A to B in a certain way, and they create observability and security on top of that. But from a different perspective, they try and solve two very different problems. One is very much focused on securing that sort of your API surface area from the outside world, that north-south traffic, I think is the parlance. And service mesh is very much east-west traffic, although I think API vendors, API management providers will try and tell you that they can do service mesh, and service mesh providers will tell you they can do API management. And to a certain extent, there's a water line there where the mud goes between the oil and the water. If you know what I mean. There's definitely some mixing there in terms of capability. But for the moment, I do see it as that there are two very distinct spaces because, and this is a general problem with service mesh, and in order to use service mesh, you have to adopt microservices, and the only way you're going to adopt microservices is if you adopt Kubernetes. So, your Venn diagram of users gets smaller and smaller as you move down into the center. Whereas an API gateway or an API management platform can work at all scales. It can work with an on-premise monolith, and it can work all the way down at the service mesh layer. So there are different worlds, and they have different scopes, and they solve very, very specific problems. And is it a bad thing? No, it's great that technology is moving on. It creates competition. It creates innovation. As somebody who doesn't like complexity, I find service mesh one of those things where I think, do you really need it? But I'm not going to tell my customers that. Well, shit, I think I just did. So overall, I just feel like it's muddy, but it's not unmanageable, and I think there's plenty of space for both to exist. It's not an either-or scenario. It's not black and white, and it doesn't need to be.
True. I agree with it. I think the key theme, like I've seen over the course of this discussion over the last hour and a half almost, there are two key themes that have definitely come up. I think one is the need for efficiency and how to approach that in an organization when you're talking, whether that's development efficiency, whether that is marketing operational efficiency, whether that is revenue operations. So there's a theme around efficiency and how you can approach that from a technology and how technology will enable some of that. And then the second part, like you say right now, is complexification of your overall stack, your overall product, because ultimately the more complex things are, the more time you need to spend not just building it, but to maintain it. There's going to be more time and effort that is needed to actually understand it. If you know the teams are no longer available, and in some cases, if it's a one-person team, then that's probably going to take some time to decomplexify as well. So absolutely agree with you on that. I think the key theme here to understand, again, horses for courses, right tools for your business, whichever one works for you, is going to be dependent on truly what your use case is and whether you have the right people, whether you have the right process to actually approach it. So I think that's going to be my takeaway. Quick thoughts from you, James. Anything else to add on this before we move on to the next question?
Just briefly, I agree with that. I think for me, what I recognize and recommend for clients is understand and examine the need. And I think the service mesh, there's different. They come in different forms. You can get something very minimal that can address a few situations for observability and fault tolerance and a few of our common patterns, distributed computing patterns that we need to put in there. And a service mesh might be a good fit. And maybe you don't need a big vendor solution. You might just need something small and lightweight to insert in there to get you what you need. But a lot of clients come to me and say, should I have one? And I'll say, do you need one? So that's what I would challenge anyone that's trying to figure it out. Do you really need one? If so, challenge yourself to figure out, one, could you revisit the architectural decisions and guidance that you have for the way you're building software to eliminate its needs so you can simplify things? And maybe either use it as a temporary stopgap until you can get to that point, or say, ask yourself, what is it from the service mesh you really need, and focus in on that and try not to go whole in taking on every little feature and that's enabled inside of someone's service mesh. Figure out what you need, implement that part, and move forward and see if it works for you. Because as you said, there's a lot of complexity. It's going to bring in more humans to handle more infrastructure and operations that may be unnecessary if we think differently about how we architect our software. So just use a little bit of caution. Make sure that you're selecting for the right reasons and not because you're trying to tick a box.
Absolutely. Well, we've got our first question from the audience, which is really, really good. So I'm going to sub that in before I get into my own questions. So, and this is again a topic which we did touch upon really, really early on into today's event, but it is a topic that's close to our hearts once again. So, GraphQL. All right. So the question here is, what is next for GraphQL? Where does it stand today? And what do you see as the future of GraphQL as we evolve? So I'll probably rephrase that a little bit, perhaps, and maybe add in my little dose of spice into that. GraphQL, is it going through an existential crisis at this point of time? Or is it merely adopting to the changing needs of its user base? So I'll go over to you, James, to kick this off. GraphQL, your thoughts on it? Existential crisis or evolving technology?
It's been an interesting journey to watch so far. Most teams that I've seen adopting GraphQL are using it because they need speed of development between their front end and their back end. And oftentimes it's because the front end is actually sometimes responsible for building out some of the back end or all of the back end. And so they want something that's very efficient, effective, that they can handle both sides of. At least that's what I've seen. I know some organizations are using it for federation. I know Tyk supports that as well. I know that's an interesting use case that's starting to emerge, whether it's a single federated GraphQL for an entire organization or segmented based on particular areas. But to me, I think it feels like it's sort of well. What I'll say is I come from the SOAP days too. So anybody that's been around during the SOAP days and the SOA days, it was very reminiscent of that. When I had to deal with SOAP, I had to help a startup airline get off the ground literally, and they were using SOAP services, and we had to implement a middleware that was very much like an API gateway. And so we had to write lots of plugins for that middleware so that it can understand every payload that we're sending between it, because everything's tunneled through HTTP. SOAP by itself supports multiple protocols, so it just kind of tunnels through HTTP, and it's not unlike GraphQL. So from the operational side and of it, I see a lot of challenges, and I see a lot of people that say that kind of are short-sighted and aren't looking at the operational side of GraphQL. And so they say, "Yep, works for me on my laptop. This is great. I wrote a few lines of code. I wrote a resolver. I got a few things up and running, wired it in, and I'm all set." And they don't realize what's really involved to rate limit it, to secure it, with fine grain authorization, data entitlements, all the things that you see, at least in the enterprise world, that you're oftentimes bumping into. And so it becomes a challenge. So I think it's in this maturity phase where some people are using it with success. And I think people are trying it because they're curious. And then they're kind of going down a path and hitting some walls and going, oh, wow, okay, now I need to write this, this intelligent piece of code that goes onto some middleware, whether it's as a plugin inside of a gateway like Tyk or if it's something else, to be able to enforce security. Or I've got to rewrite what an API gateway would normally give me in my code base so that I can enforce it at the code level, so I can make the right decision to ensure that I'm shaping the response correctly and dropping fields that they're not allowed to see and so on. And then, putting in some error messages accordingly to give a partial response back. So for me, I'm seeing a bit of a challenge, and it's a bit reminiscent of things that were happening about 20 years ago. So I'm curious and excited to see where it goes. I know it's solving some problems for people, so I don't doubt that. But I think the operationalization side of it, because of the way it's designed, it was designed to solve a specific problem, and I think we're trying to push it to solve new problems. And it's going to be interesting to see where that goes and how we end up addressing that. Is GraphQL going to evolve, or is it that we're going to have to shove more middleware solutions in there and find ways to do that without making it difficult to do distributed deployments like we had in SOA, where we have to deploy code to our middleware that's aware of the payload whenever we make a change, and also deploy code for our changes to our services and everything else all at the same time, and coordinate those deployments so that everything's in sync and we don't have any kind of runtime errors. So we saw that a lot in the SOA days. Want to learn from that and try to avoid that if possible. So excited to see where it goes.
Great. Martin, just curious again from where GraphQL has come to. Obviously, there was an original vision behind it. There was a need for GraphQL when it first came out. It was trying to solve a specific problem with REST, and it was the answer for omni-channel application building, or trying to essentially speak to multiple data sources and bringing that data all together into one single unified graph. And I think that was kind of the problem that it was addressing at that point of time. Do you see a lot of the challenges that GraphQL is facing right now is born out of the fact that now that those initial use cases have been hit, we're now looking at a world which is trying to scale and trying to figure out a problem for GraphQL at scale, perhaps, and GraphQL is probably not quite there yet with some of those, or has certain issues when it comes to looking at massive scale productions, perhaps?
So GraphQL, it's interesting. GraphQL was, as James said, it was initially designed to solve the one-to-many problem of single-page web apps and mobile applications. You have a mobile app, you need to build 6 different components of your view, and those are all individual API calls, and making 6, 7, 10 different API calls is expensive, both on the client and for the server. And so GraphQL was a way to say, oh, maybe we can make this a bit nicer. And yeah, it's very reminiscent of the SOAP days and RPC and things like that, where you make a single query and you get lots of data back, but you don't actually know what's happening in the background. And with that regard, it solved that problem. Great, and it's fine how it is now. The thing is, you've got something like microservices showing up, and then they go, well, how do we scale GraphQL across microservices? And the scaling issue, the solution was federation, it's called GraphQL Federation. And it is an additional layer of complexity on top of something that is already quite complex. GraphQL to implement at the server side is an expensive component. You've kind of, especially if you're coming from REST, you're kind of going, oh, I have to take my REST services and now I have to write a resolver. Then I have to put that resolver somewhere and run it. And then I have to plug that into my GraphQL gateway. You still need something to take the GraphQL request, transform it, and make the outbound data query, whether it's to a database or a REST service, or through multiple layers. So you're building all this middleware, and that's a bit of a kludge. It's not great. And Federation was built to sort of designed to solve this, and now you've got Federation v2, which is different and not properly backwards compatible. So overall, GraphQL is going through a transition of saying, it was initially designed for single-page web apps and mobile applications for the front end, for the client design folks to make their lives easier. And it is now finding itself moving up the stack into the server side so that you actually have calls between systems that are GraphQL-based instead of client-server. And the thing is, there's already a lot of stuff that solves that problem. There's gRPC, and there's Facebook's own one. I keep forgetting its name. There's several binary protocols, which are basically RPC protocols that handle system-to-system comms and try to get the scaling issue done using gateways or service mesh patterns and working at that level, as opposed to having to add another layer of complexity on top of it. So now, back to the existing example of service mesh, you've got Kubernetes, your microservices, your service mesh, and your microservices are now also running GraphQL resolvers, which are translating requests coming in so they can become something else. It's bonkers, if you ask me, once you sort of look at the depths of complexity, just, in some cases, to maybe just render a cat video on your Instagram feed, whatever it may be. So I do feel GraphQL is going through, it was seen as sort of this big savior. It is like JavaScript, kind of being pushed into the server side and hitting lots and lots of barriers with regards to scale. And we're entering that trial of disillusionment where people are going like, is this really the right tool for the job? Now, we have, not to toot our horn, but we have a really excellent GraphQL tool, and we have a really excellent sort of future vision for GraphQL, which we call our universal data graph. And that's essentially saying, well, if we want to do GraphQL in the server, you don't want to have to write a bunch of resolvers. You don't want to have to do all of that complexity. You want to plug your existing infrastructure into it and just immediately take advantage of GraphQL. And the way we see GraphQL, the way I see it, is when you look at GraphQL as what it's designed to do, which is meant to connect lots and lots of microservices into a single query, you actually see an integration pattern. And in at least in my view, one of the places where GraphQL can have a great impact is integrating multiple services for your service developers to be able to query the entire thing, to be able to query all of your microservices as a single database almost. And in that regard, you're kind of looking at older patterns where you try to do that with an enterprise service bus or SOA, for example, or just writing lots of proxies or transactions where you group REST calls into batches and try to get them to work to write complex middleware. Instead of doing that, you can just simplify it with GraphQL, and your front end can use it, and your server side can use it, and all of a sudden you have this magic mirror to all of your data sources. Very cool. But again, you've got folks having to say, well, I still have to adopt GraphQL. We have to go through this learning curve and say, is this really the right thing? And to be honest, most of the customers we speak to about GraphQL, they see it as something they would like to adopt, something that they're very interested in. It is it sits on their roadmap in the future because they think it's cool, but it's usually alongside RESTful services. You still have your RESTful services. And in some cases, and this is where it gets super bonkers, you've got your, let's say, your microservice architecture, which is running all on REST or something, and then you have a GraphQL layer on top of that in order to develop against this microservice backend in a cohesive way. But you don't want to expose GraphQL to your customers because those APIs, they need, as James said, they need to be secured and rate limited and all that kind of stuff. Plus, there's so many different routes it can take that you could end up with cascading failures. However, so then you've got folks saying, let's build a REST resolver against GraphQL. So you have a REST API that is specific for maybe a specific kind of query that then calls into GraphQL, which then calls into REST. And it gets really crazy. It gets really bizarre. So I think we're getting into levels of silliness with GraphQL where we really need to understand, well, either we really get GraphQL right and we secure it and we turn it into something that anybody can consume at the client side, or whether that be server or mobile client or browser, and make that just a decent pattern that's easy to adopt. Or we simply say, look, this is actually a very good server-side component, and there are scaling, the solutions to scaling with federation are actually very elegant once you adopt them. But in that case, you then need to really solve the client-side access piece. Does that make sense? I'm not sure. I'm kind of talking in circles.
I think the key takeaway, once again, it comes down to back to basics, doesn't it? Where once again you're thinking about use cases and you're thinking about decomplexifying your solution, putting together REST with GraphQL with REST in front again. Is it necessary? Maybe in some cases, but is it really? So I think it really comes down to what you're specifically looking at it from your. Is it valuable enough to invest that time, that resource, into something like this, which will, that return on investment that comes to investing on, say, something like GraphQL, is it worth it? Is it valuable for some organizations? Absolutely. I think we've seen the likes of Airbnb, we've seen the likes of Netflix who are using it at scale, and it has been highly beneficial for them the way they are doing it. But are you at that scale? Do you really need it? Do you have that resource to back up that kind of development maintenance on an ongoing basis? Maybe, maybe not. So it really comes down to, again, those first principles of thinking about efficiency, decomplexification, and then the right tool for the right job. So I think that's kind of the key takeaway. So thank you so much for that question. I think we've got a whole lot coming in, and I'm also aware that we are exactly on time. So maybe we'll keep going for a little while. We've got a couple more questions to go before we probably close this out. So let's take a couple more top questions that have come in. And one's been very interesting because, again, we've spoken about this people-centric approach to APIs and some of the impactful things that APIs can lead to and enable. But at the same time, the people who are helming APIs and the development and the creation of APIs, again, become quite important in actually governing something like that. So question to you, James, in this case, where we talk about whether technologists alone can be trusted to build APIs, or do you, once again, does that need more voices? Does that need voices, not just, need more voices internally, but also feedback and what that overall cycle looks like for your application development, not just tech-driven, perhaps, not just CV-driven in some cases, but that holistic look at how do you build APIs and API-first products?
Yeah, one of the reasons why I'm specialized in this space of APIs, I'm really passionate about it and have been. I've been involved with it for nearly a decade now. Is it's specifically focused on modern APIs. Is that it incorporates three key ingredients. It comes at the intersection of business, product, and technology. What we design as an API has an impact on other people. If I'm a developer working inside of a single code base and we all agree to use Java or Node or Ruby or Python or Golang or whatever it is, and we agree on some libraries, we can make that decision as a technology group. And other than the velocity that it might, increase or decrease based on our choices, maybe the learning curve, if we're adopting something new and it's a little bit riskier, might slow us down a little bit until we get everybody trained up and ready to go. Whatever the case is, we can isolate that risk to a specific team or a group of people. When you design an API and you open that up, whether it's in a large enterprise and one team inside the enterprise is designing and deploying an API, and someone else in another part of the organization is going to use it, or if you're teeing something up for partners, customers, whatever it is that you're delivering, you have communication paths and you have dependencies that are outside your control. And so we have to do more than just sit down and think about the technology. We have to do more than just get excited about specific services that we're building. That's all great. But what is the contract? What is the agreement we have? What is our communication? So I like to say that APIs are a conversation, and there's three levels of conversation. There's the human to human, there's the machine to machine, and there's the developer to developer. So the human to human is, does my API deliver outcomes that weren't possible before? It's either automating something on my behalf or enable me to do something from a web or mobile app or from a voice app or whatever it is. There's the developer to developer. Can I communicate how to use this API through appropriate documentation, code examples, reference apps, all the things that are necessary to deliver a great developer experience? And then there's machine to machine. And that's where most of us focus on as developers. And so if we just let developers purely in isolation design an API and deliver an API, they're probably going to focus more on the machine to machine side, unless they really have a background in product ownership, product development, that kind of background where they're able to blend that. They're really going to be drilled into, what are the HTTP methods? What's my JSON look like? What's my GraphQL schema look like, whatever it is. What does my IDL look like for gRPC? And they're going to focus on that, and they're going to miss the opportunity to solve real problems for real humans and get that human to human conversation going. So a lot of what I do in my training and consulting in the recent book that I wrote for Addison Wesley is to focus on that. How do you go from requirements and focus on the human to human aspect, and then take it to the machine to machine, the developer to developer conversations? And that's really what's important. So it has to be cross-functional teams. It has to be people that are representing the business or the product or some combination of that, to have stakeholders, to give feedback, to have conversations about designs, not just immediately start coding and see what your API design is going to evolve into and focus on just purely the machine to machine. And I think we miss an opportunity there if we don't have those conversations early and often.
Yep, thank you for that, James. Just as an extension of this, over to Martin, I think there is always this curiosity from developers when we talk about this, where obviously we are talking a little bit more about having certain governances in place, certain practices and processes in place, but sometimes it's seen as a hindrance to innovation. So where is that right balance between, finding that tool that you find exciting and you want to try it out and you want to bring that into the fold versus, okay, do we have the right practices and processes in place to actually adopt it in a more sustainable way, or is this a one-off? So that balance between innovation versus standardization, what's your take on that?
Oh, this is a problem every company faces, and it's not just limited to APIs. I think it's just the general idea that do you move fast and break things, and therefore essentially embed technical debt into your future growth and just accept it? Or do you sit and take time to really design your solution properly? And it depends on what situation you're in, to be perfectly honest. If your entire business model relies on the adoption and successful deployment of your services, not UI, not UX, there's no other USP except for this API and the developer experience, then you need a design first approach. You need to immediately think, because your API is the product. And so you should look at it like any other product. You should go through a product design process. You should probably do design first, make it have a multifaceted team sitting and talking to each other in order to make sure this thing goes to market. If, however, the situation is more of a, okay, we're building service-to-service calls internally, or we're building services internally that support a wider product that might have externally facing APIs, then yeah, go fast and break stuff. Do we really need to have a whole design-centric approach just for those particular services? It really depends. It all depends on who your consumers are. And ultimately, yes, you could argue that inside an organization, your consumers are other developers, but within an organization, even if your internal APIs are other developers, you don't necessarily need to think of it as a product to an extent as you would for the polish needed to do an externally facing product. Because ultimately, you can go and get your developers to talk to each other, and you can sort of build that support through documentation and some kind of tribal knowledge. I know that's a poo-poo word for developer teams, and something people want to avoid because everything should be documented, and developers should never have to speak to each other, and they should be able to operate in complete darkness in a cave and never have to communicate to the outside world and just be given their tasks. But that's not the world we live in. That's not the type of companies people run. That's not how humans work. So there's two sides to it. I think it's very important for anything that is externally facing and product-led, where your API is the product or is a significant component of your revenue, then yeah, you want to go and design that API well, and you want to spend a lot of time thinking about who's going to use it, how they're going to use it, how they're going to interact with your organization programmatically. On the flip side, whether if you have internal problems you need to get done, sometimes just to bring a capability or to run a POC or something like that, yeah, go for it. Go build something fast and break it. But set those expectations right up front, and that's something that doesn't always happen. You've got to go out front and say, by the way, this is going to break, and it might not get maintained anymore. So use at your own risk. Very much like most open source software is released. So don't build anything critical. Don't build anything mission critical on something that your intern built because it was cool, right? And I guess those are two extremes, but you got to find yourself somewhere in the middle of that. The long iteration cycles for products can cause frustration both for customers and for your internal teams, because stuff takes so long to get out the door that you actually might miss the boat. And it really is down to really understanding what the demand is and how much time you've got to get something to market in order to sort of prioritize those two demands, because they will always be in conflict. Do I have time to do it right? Will I make money? And pre-revenue startup, for example, they'll be like, well, we got to get this to market because we need people to buy it. On the other hand, if you get the wrong thing to market, people won't buy it. But there's a middle ground there. In reality, it's never got to be. And there's that saying, and it has to be said every single time: do not let perfect get in the way of good. Right? And because people are perfectionists, they're always going to want to take the design first approach. And sometimes they shouldn't. But that's a controversial opinion. I'm very much of the pantser, seat of the pants style design process, where I much rather sit there, pock something, write it up, and get it out the door in order to test it against the market. Much to the annoyance of my engineering team, who then turn around and say, "Martin, why did you do this to us? I must now suffer." So I'm sorry, team. I will do it again.
Yeah. I like what you said about the expectation.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I really like what you said about setting expectations. That's really key. I've seen product companies come out and they say, well, we'll just label our API V0. And they'll put V0 in the path, kind of indicating that it's a pre-release or an experimentation. Then they'll start signing contracts against it. And then it becomes V1, but it's V0. And then they're trying to figure out how to get people to V1 or V2 or whatever they want to call it, because they did that. So there are just some different challenges, but setting expectations is really, really important.
Well, thank you so much. Once again, I think there is that little balance to try and figure out where we stand with what we want to achieve, and then what are we willing to give up to be able to achieve that. And once again, perfect is not usually the goal. We are good with good enough to get started. And in some cases, if you're, like you say, a pre-revenue startup, you might be taking on some technical debt in favor of going to market early. And I think as long as you're aware of it, your team is aware of it, and have a roadmap to actually address some of that, you're probably going to be golden. But with that, if you're curious, I'm looking on the right-hand side, or maybe it's left for you, I'm not sure. It's about the questions that are coming in, and unfortunately, we are already 12 minutes over. So I think I'm going to not stop us, but pretty much close out this particular session with a look forward into what is coming up next in 2023. And this is a two-part question. I think one of the questions is around a topic that we touched upon previously with Claire, really about an inclusive, diverse, and an equal world. It's a very important topic as we move into 2023, coming off of a rather shaky 2022. And moving into 2023, of course. So curious again. So there is obviously a lot of talk around this, and I think we've seen some really great points coming off of that earlier session. But the key question that a lot of people have is, as an organization, how do we get started with something like this? What are the things that we can do today, and how do we plan for a more diverse, inclusive, and equal environment in the future? Martin, perhaps we'll kick this off with you. We know it's something that's very, very important for us, and we've taken a few steps, but your take on it as a CEO and founder.
Oh, diversity and inclusion is a big deal. I find, well, our own company, so Tyk itself it's a global company. We have staff I think in something like 26 different countries, and they're all over the place across every continent except for Antarctica almost. And we are, I think at the moment we're at 36% female to male, so we could be doing better. But what I'm trying to say is we're already a bit of a melting pot, and what I quite like about that is the reason it's important is bringing different perspectives together simply improves how we overall see each other. If you're building an organization with a monoculture, so you're building, let's say, in a single country, you'll still have diversity and inclusion problems because there are subcultures within the monoculture. So let's say only building in the United Kingdom or only building in the United States, there's still a common ground around we all live in the United States. That doesn't exist in a real global company where everybody has to work together, where you've got folks working from Turkey with folks in the States and from all different backgrounds, ethnicities, genders, and orientations. And I think having those viewpoints represented and forcing people to think about who's on the other side of that chat box, who's on the other side of that call, and how do they see the world, and trying to really understand that brings a much bigger understanding to the type of users you might be speaking to. It's very, very easy and myopic about about a market you're speaking to or a type of user. But if you really want to, I don't know, build a great place to work, you need to make sure that everybody feels safe. And it comes down to safety. It's not so much about meeting quotas. They need to feel safe to be themselves. They need to feel safe to express themselves, and they need to feel safe that when they come to work, nothing's going to happen. They have measures and support in place should something happen, and that they are respected. You know, I mean, it's easy for me to say I'm a white cis male, so you know, up here in terms of privilege, as expressed in the Western context, but I think we need to constantly be vigilant around making sure people are included and making sure that we are treating others fairly and that we are building equity, not just equality. It's both sides. The thing is, unfortunately, in a company is not a country, and you know there are different motives at play. You have profit motives, you have organizational motives, you have overall having to keep staff happy, and there's a lot of I might be rambling a little bit here. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of components that fall together.
No, this is something that is very close to you. I'm aware of it, having worked with you with this. And I think the key thing that I think from what I take away from that is, obviously, I think as an organization, one thing is thinking about the right hiring patterns and putting that in place, perhaps the way you hire people and how you approach that, perhaps, but also equally having the environment within to actually encourage more people to join you, the culture that goes behind it, the safety, the security that people would feel. So I think it's like the two-pronged process, of course, looking for people more intentionally, and you know, almost not intentionally in the sense of filling out a quota, but intentionally in the sense that, okay, you're looking for people who are right for the job and opening up the opportunity for everyone. It's not limited by geography. It's not limited by a specific race or anything else. It's very much, there are no limits. And I think that's the whole point of remote work in some cases. And being a remote first company, that is something that we can actually bring to the fore as well.
There is, sorry, just to cut in one more time, but there's one more thing, and that is, it's something that I try to explain. Maybe I explain it badly, but especially in a remote company, there is no office, right? There's no monoculture you can bring people into and say, this is one place where, you know, once you enter this building, this is how we behave and these are the values we believe in. You are dealing with people who are working within their own context, right? So if I am a Muslim living in Turkey, or I am, I don't know, a Palestinian living in Canada, or a Palestinian living in Palestine, or an Iranian living in Iran, whichever, you know, pick something. The organization, you are not coming to the organization when you join the Slack channel. You're not going into an office. The organization is coming to you, right? So all of a sudden, when people speak to you and when they have expectations of how you should behave, you are in your own context. You can't suddenly change how you see the world because you have to live within the context that you live in. And so it kind of ends up boiling down to lowest common denominator to find the common ground that unites everybody, as opposed to trying to enforce values. It's very hard to do that. You know, you can't sit there and say, well, we have to enforce a certain Western value on these folks that are working for us in somewhere that doesn't believe in those values, even though they, you know, disregarding the ethical nature of whether it's right or wrong and on what side you sit on there. The issue is the fact that the person you're talking to, that specific staff member and team member, has to live within that cultural context. So, and it could be the case that if they start espousing or start communicating in a way that espouses other beliefs, that they could actually get in trouble. It could actually be bad for them. I mean, like, for example, in Russia now, it is illegal to expose, to even communicate LGBTQ values in any way. It's become a full-blown law that you can't express yourself in that community. So if anything you do, you can be thrown in jail. You can be punished for it. So now, if you were a Western company with a Russian employee who happens to be in that community and says, well, why aren't you more of an activist, or why are you suppressing it? Or, you know, trying to be woke, I hate that word, but trying to be progressive in that way, which is good. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Please, by all means, we should be living our values. We can't expect our staff members to be living those in their context. You know, we'd be putting them in danger. And that's a really thin line. It's hard to be an ethical corporation that wants to do right by its staff and by its diverse community. When you are actually working remotely, you are forcing those views or forcing somebody else to espouse those views in some way, or not. I mean, it's good to ask them to respect them, but you have to know where the boundaries lie in terms of when it's okay for monoculture to slip through those cultural boundaries within somebody else's context. And it's a super weird example, but it's a reverse colonialism. You can't sort of say, oh, well, we're a Western company, so I don't care if you live in Qatar. You have to live our values. And you're like, holy shit, that's not going to work. You can't do that to somebody, they'll be in jail.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and those are extreme cases, but there's subtler ones as well.
And that cultural thing is something that I've also looked into. No worries. I looked into as well, because obviously I come from India, and I think the way we think about things is a little bit different. But then again, I've lived in Singapore for almost 13 years, and they have a completely different stance on a few different things. There are similarities, but also differences. And now I've moved all the way over to the United States, and it definitely thinks very, very differently in a lot of different things. So there is that adjustment and understanding of what impacts you, where you stand as an individual, what are things that you are willing to be a part of, to integrate with, and then the things that matter to you enough to say, no, this is where, this is my take. I'm not going to force this on you, but this is where I stay. And I think organizations respecting that perhaps is a part of that cultural look and cultural integration overall, where we're not just, again, putting our stance on what it is to be part of the organization, but to the whole world at large, because that's what we think is the right thing to do. But it is really down to being respectful of what people think. Or obviously there are boundaries to be put in place where still people feel secure and safe to work and come to work in these remote environments as well. So that would be sort of my 2 cents there. I think I'm going to move right along, unless, James, if you have any, key things to contribute to this. Otherwise, we will move on to the next segment.
No, I appreciate everything Martin shared, and he actually brought some things up that I hadn't even thought about as well. So it's been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. All right, so we are way over time already, so I'm going to close this out with our closing statements now. We're going to be talking a little bit about, back on with folks, production team. We still have one last question to go with this. There we go.
And the sound's gone.
We're almost done there. No worries. So last question. So again, we have looked back at 2022. The final little bit here is about what you are looking forward to in 2023, both once again from a humanities perspective, from tech perspective, or both in unison. James, perhaps we'll kick this off with you. What are you looking forward to in 2023?
I think I've seen sort of the tail end of this year starting to give us a preview of what next year will look like, at least in the API space. The things that I'm seeing are pretty exciting. I'm seeing a lot of organizations start to incorporate more of the human perspective into APIs. We were Martin was mentioning this earlier, not just from a staffing of an organization, but really just kind of incorporating the feedback and the input of what we're doing in the API space and in technology in general, trying to incorporate more and more of being aware of everything beyond our immediate sphere. It used to be that we were focused on what was in our town and then what was in our state or province or region, and then now we're so global these days that it requires us to think more and more about the human to human side of things. So when I was talking earlier about APIs being a human to human conversation, I'm excited and seeing kind of an early stage of people really sitting down and trying to understand more about what the human aspect of this is, whether it's building software, whether it's building a business, or if it's in my case focused heavily on the API side of things. That human perspective is going to be key. I know that the way things are kind of going as a result of this year, things are going to be a little bit tighter on budgets. I think there's going to be some challenges in some areas for some organizations in that way. But I think that's where organizations can really step up and stand out, and they can actually start bringing in the human side of things and really make a difference. So to me, that's kind of what I'm seeing. We see AI. Martin, you mentioned AI earlier, and kind of the growth of that and that trend kind of standing out. If it helps us be able to do things as humans better or support us as humans better and not just make us more robots in front of a keyboard and a monitor, then I think we're headed in the right direction. And it's been fascinating to see some of those things. So I'm excited for the next year to see where things head from that perspective and to really get more human aspects into our software, into our APIs as we move forward into the new year.
Great. Thanks, James. Over to you, Martin, for your exciting thing for 2023, perhaps from humanity, from tech. Maybe not as exciting, but at least back to sanity in some cases. But what are you looking forward to in 2023?
Well, I think this is probably not very technology specific, but ultimately the 2022 has been a bit of a roller coaster. 2021 was a roller coaster. We haven't really had a series of years where we kind of gone, gosh, nothing's happened. It's been quite uneventful. I would very much welcome going back to having some boring news. Somebody misspelled potato, or here in New Zealand where I live, the news used to make like headline news if somebody was attacked by a cow. Now it's all about anti-vaxxers and geopolitics, and you kind of go, well, come on, guys, let's settle down a bit. So what I would like to see in 2023 is a bit more calm, maybe. I probably won't get it, but just a little bit more stability. Because we're a remote company, we are heavily affected by what happens out there in the world. 2 years ago, we were trying to hire some DevOps engineers, and we had an excellent recruit, absolutely perfect for the job. We wanted to offer him the job, but he was in Iran, and Iran was under embargo. So we could not in any way hire this person because it would put at risk our work with American government clients, right? Or more recently, we have staff both in Russia and the Ukraine, and we've had to help some of them escape, and we've had to try and make sure that these folks are still productive if they want to be productive, if they want to work, and make sure they have the space to recover. And you know what? I really don't want to have to deal with that. I really don't think anybody should have to deal with that kind of stupid situation. So it would be very nice if 2023 would just calm down. Pardon my French. So what I'm looking forward to is, maybe a cease in hostilities, and preferably maybe some kind of calming down of this bloody pandemic, which we are still in. But that's my old man rant. So my apologies. From a business perspective, it's just been a little bit stressful. So the next thing is going to be, of course, this recession everybody's talking about, which I'm not looking forward to, and I'm hoping we somehow manage to avoid, or at least it's going to be slightly less. As I said, there's going to be contraction in the industry, or that's expected. I would say I'm not looking forward to that, but I am looking forward to the challenge of trying to beat it. I'm not going to let the world get us down, man.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Hopeful, less exciting, but hopeful and calm. I think that's what we are hoping for at this point of time. I am completely with you. 2022, obviously, world at large has been, there's been ups and downs all across, and there's been a lot of uncertainty. I'm hoping for the same with myself as well, just settling down a little bit from where I am today with even in Boston's negative temperatures, try and settle in a little bit more and see what the new year has to bring for us all. Hopefully a peaceful, calmer, hopeful 2023 is ahead of us. So with that note, thank you so much. It has been a fantastic conversation, both Martin and James. I'm sure we can go on for a little longer as well, and longer more. But thank you once again. This has been fantastic. All right. Well, that was quite the session. I think you would agree that was our main event. And once again, something that we did not address earlier on, and you might be curious about this as well, was that, of course, originally Kin Lane was supposed to be part of this conversation, and unfortunately he couldn't make it. He is down with COVID at this point of time, and we do hope and wish him speedy recovery, and we'll definitely have an opportunity to collaborate again in the future soon. So absolutely looking forward to that. But a big thank you to James Higginbotham for stepping in. He did an incredible job, and as you would agree with some of those responses, some of those answers, pretty much on the fly straight away with audience and my own questions. So thank you, a big thank you for stepping up there, James. We absolutely enjoyed that session. You made it really, really useful for those who were listening together alongside Martin as well. So thank you once again. Thought I would address that a little bit. All right, moving on to our, well, I think penultimate segment at this point is the winner announcement of our ugly sweater contest. Well, I wouldn't call it the ugly sweater contest anymore. I do believe sweaters do have feelings, so I'm just going to call it the winner of the sweater contest that has been going on our social media. And I think I'm going to start off with the runner-up, almost an honorary mention for an amazing entry to our contest today. So big shout out to Andrew on Twitter for sharing his Nicolas Cage themed holiday jumper. And if you've got a photograph, we will send that over and share across later on with all of you. So honorary mention to you. Unfortunately, we could only have one winner, and the person and the entry that won out the sweater contest of ours that has been going on was R.P. William. So R.P. William, who submitted a photo of his daughter in a fantastic Disney-themed holiday sweater. Really, really well done. Big congratulations to you. The gift card, the Amazon gift card, should be on your way. So hopefully we've got all of the details that we needed from him. Thank you so much for your entries. Thank you, everyone, for your entries. It has been really, really good to see all of these different points coming through, different entries, different photographs, different settings coming in from all across the world. But big congratulations to you, R.P. William. All right, that brings us pretty much to our final segment here. These are videos once again. So we've been interspersing these all across. These are video tips to go with for 2023. So cue the videos.
Hello, API management community. I'm very excited to join you today for Tyk's Holiday API Management Extravaganza. My name is Travis, and I work for SPS Commerce, which is the world's largest retail network. As a principal software engineer there, I focus on developer experience. And 2022 has been a transformative year for SPS Commerce's API design and management approach. With APIs as a fundamental building block for most of the software we build and you build, APIs are truly our universal language of development within our polyglot community. My number one tip for API management success is to bring the concepts of inner source to your APIs. By this, I mean pull together open collaboration, ensuring that you have a single centralized API catalog that your engineers can easily find reference to all API endpoints, resources, and all the things they need. Also, focusing on open communication provides full transparency between API producers and consumers to ensure you're actually building the right thing, which is pretty difficult sometimes. So with that, happy holidays and thanks.
Hi, I'm Lorna from Ivan, and I've been asked to share a tip for success with you. It was hard to choose just one, but I tried to really think about not just what I wish I could change, but also what sort of change would be really compelling, really valued. So my tip is this: when I look at the amazing features we have in API management today, all of that's on the publisher side. What I want us to do now is build on that developer experience and start making some of those features available, particularly to our big scale users, the integrators. Can we give them some metrics, some diagnostics, things that will help them make the most out of the API? I think that can come from where the best API tools in the stack are already. So that's my tip for things to do in the coming year.
All right, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for those tips. So we had about 6 tips, I believe, a little bit more than that. So which one did you like? Tell us in the chat, tell us in the comments. We will be listening. And tell us your top tip for 2023 as well. Thank you, everyone. And of course, Julian is here with me. Thank you so much, Julian. This has been a fantastic session. Would you agree?
My pleasure, Buddha. Fun to learn. I learned so much about APIs. I'm into it. I think I'm going to quit the piano gig and ask you for a developer role quickly.
Well, you never know. There might be a Tykapalooza coming up next. You never know. So a big thank you to the entire team who has made all of this possible. The entire production team behind the scenes who's brought all of these amazing videos, pictures, sound, of course, with Julian, and the Tyk team, of course, within our own production house to help us along with all of the different designs, planning. Our chief advocate and visionary for this event, Jason, as well. Thank you so much for making this all possible, putting this all together. And I had an absolute blast hosting the session. Hopefully you had a blast listening to us and got some of those key takeaways. Look back in 2022 and what you can think about and expect in 2023. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much once again. And until next time, take care, happy holidays, and see you next time, guys. Cheers.